Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I put together a special collection of incredible real-life stories that show just how unpredictable life can be. We're going to cover the whole spectrum today, from shocking family secrets that completely flip a household upside down, to toxic relationships where someone gets the ultimate reality check. Each of these stories hits differently, so make sure to get comfortable and watch until the very end. Let's dive straight into our first story, which proves that sometimes an unexpected twist doesn't break a family. It just makes it bigger and stronger. I am 34 years old, and I've been happily married to my husband, David, for 13 years. Together, we have 3 boys, a wild, loud, chaotic pack of brothers who are the absolute center of our universe. My David is the most reliable, honest, and loving man I have ever known. He works in IT. He is a total homebody, and our entire marriage has been built on a foundation of absolute, unquestioning trust. We don't hide our screens, and we know each other's PIN codes. In 13 years, David has never given me a single reason to doubt his loyalty. He is an incredible husband and a deeply devoted father to our boys. I've always considered myself incredibly blessed, believing our life was a calm, safe harbor where nothing completely life-altering could suddenly pop up. But everything changed a couple of weeks ago on a completely ordinary Monday. David was sitting in his home office, deeply focused on his computer, when his phone buzzed on the desk. He had received a direct message on Facebook from a teenage girl. The message was brief, clearly written with a lot of nervousness, but incredibly polite. The girl introduced herself and said that, based on everything she knew, she believed David was her biological father. I happened to be walking into his office right at that moment to set down a fresh cup of coffee. I watched David's face go completely pale in a matter of seconds. He froze, staring at the screen. My immediate instinct was panic, assuming it was some kind of internet scammer trying to target a family for money. But as David kept reading, reaching the part of the message where the girl mentioned her biological mother's name, I watched a massive, complicated puzzle click together in his mind all at once. His jaw dropped, and he looked up at me with the eyes of a man who had just felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. It turned out that exactly 17 years ago, when David was just 23 and long before he and I even knew each other existed, he had a brief summer romance. He and this girl dated for just a couple of months. It was a typical, light-hearted young romance that eventually ran its course. They broke up completely amicably, without any fighting or hard feelings. They moved to different cities, started their own lives, and completely lost touch. David had absolutely no idea that when they parted ways, she was already pregnant. For reasons we will never truly know, she chose not to tell him. Maybe she was scared, or maybe she decided she could handle it on her own. Along with the text, the girl had attached a few recent photos of herself. And looking over David's shoulder at those pictures, I didn't need a DNA test to know the truth. Looking back at us from that screen was David himself, just a female version at 16 years old. She had his exact eyes, the shape of his nose, his smile, and even that specific, quirky habit of tilting her head slightly to the side when looking at camera. It was so undeniable that trying to question it would have been foolish. We started cautiously messaging her back that very same day. As the details of her life began to unfold, my heart absolutely broke for her. We learned that her mother had tragically passed away from a severe illness about 3 years ago. At just 11 years old, she was left entirely alone, and her maternal uncle took her in. To put it mildly, life in his house was incredibly difficult. The uncle was an abusive tyrant, but it was clear that she was nothing more than a burden to him. He treated her with a cold, distant indifference, constantly making her feel like her presence in his home was a forced, heavy obligation. Because of this, she grew up wrapped in a cloud of deep loneliness. She had discovered David entirely by accident while going through some old boxes of her mother's things in the attic. She found old handwritten letters that included his name, surname, and the city where he used to live. She admitted to us that she had known about her father for over 2 years. But for those 2 entire years, she was paralyzed by fear. She was such a timid, reserved, insecure girl, terrified that her father would reject her, or that his new wife would throw a massive tantrum and slam the door in her face. It wasn't until now, at 16, that she finally gathered enough strength to hit send. I think a lot of women in my position might have reacted very differently. A petty kind of jealousy might have flared up, leading to toxic thoughts, endless interrogations about the past, or distrust. But as I sat on the couch, holding David tight while he tried to process everything, looking at the face of that terrified girl in the photo, something shifted deep inside me. She is only 16. She lost her mom. She spent 3 years in a home where she was barely tolerated. She feels completely abandoned, and right now, she is sitting by her phone just a 40-minute drive away from us, trembling with fear as she waits for a response from a man she has only seen in old pictures. I looked at David and said, "Write back to her right now. Invite her to our place for this weekend. Tell her we want her to come over for dinner, and tell her she can bring her uncle." David looked at me with a look of such immense, indescribable gratitude that I genuinely think he fell in love with me all over again in that exact second. 2 weeks ago, they came over for a Sunday barbecue. We set everything up on the back patio to keep the environment as casual and relaxed as possible. When her uncle's car pulled into our driveway and the girl stepped out, it was genuinely painful to look at her. She was incredibly pale. Her shoulders were hunched tightly inward, and her hands were shaking so badly that she was gripping the strap of her old backpack with a white-knuckled hold. But the moment David took a step toward her, tears welled up in his eyes. He walked over, knelt slightly to meet her gaze, and just softly said, "Hi, sweetheart." We spent the entire day together. At first, the conversation was incredibly stiff. She was deeply shy, giving one-word answers and constantly casting nervous glances at her uncle, who sat in an outdoor chair with a stony expression, clearly wishing he could drop her off and leave immediately. But gradually, hour by hour, that thick layer of ice began to melt. We sat out on the deck, and I started asking her about school, her friends, and her hobbies, sharing funny, embarrassing stories about our boys. Speaking of the boys, when our 3 sons found out their older sister was coming to visit, they were initially completely stunned. But when she actually walked in, they acted incredibly cool. They didn't pester her with awkward questions. Instead, they just invited her into the living room to show her their gaming console and a new game they were playing. And let me tell you, when I looked through the glass patio door and saw her laugh out loud for the first time that day, a genuine, bright laugh as she watched our youngest son jumping around ridiculously in front of the TV, something inside me completely let go. I knew we were doing the right thing. Before they left, as they were standing by the front door, David couldn't hold back anymore. He walked up to her and pulled her into a tight, protective hug. She froze for a split second from the shock of it, and then she suddenly buried her face in his shoulder and just started to cry quietly. I stepped closer, and David reached out an arm, pulling me into the embrace, so I hugged her too. She turned her head slightly, looked at me with her massive eyes, and whispered softly into my ear, "Thank you so much. I haven't felt this kind of human warmth since the day my mom died." Since that Sunday, we have spoken to her absolutely every single day. We do video calls. We text constantly in group chats. She shares her school news, sends me photos of clothes or sneakers she wants to buy, and asks me for typical, everyday advice. My husband is walking around happier than he's ever been, practically glowing from the inside out, like he's found a whole new lease on life. And then last night, after we finally got the boys to sleep, cleaned up the kitchen, and sat down for a cup of tea, David very carefully, almost as if he was terrified of scaring or upsetting me, took my hand, looked into my eyes, and asked, "Honey, how would you feel if we talked to her uncle and offered to have her move in with us permanently so she could finish her last 2 years of high school here, living with us, as part of a real, complete family?" I didn't hesitate for a single second. Immediately, without a shred of doubt, I replied, "Get the guest room ready. Let's go get our girl." I absolutely adore children, and if I'm being completely honest, I have always secretly dreamed of having a daughter. After raising 3 boys, with a house that's perpetually buried under Lego bricks, broken toy cars, dirty sneakers, and footballs, I've always missed that softer, gentler energy. Yes, technically and biologically, she doesn't share my blood, but I don't give a damn about that. I already feel a fierce, protective, deeply maternal instinct for her. I want to shield her from all the garbage and unfairness she's had to endure at such a young age. I want her to have her own cozy bedroom where no one will ever count the food she eats or scold her for playing her music too loud. I want her to be able to study in peace, to grow, to laugh, and to know with absolute certainty that she has a safe home where she is loved simply because she exists in this world. When I shared this news with some of my close friends, a few of them looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. One of them literally shook her head and said, "Do you even realize what you're signing up for?" She's a stranger's child. She's at the absolute peak of her teenage years, and she is going to put you through a living hell that you'll regret 1,000 times over. Why are you taking on someone else's problems? Just live your own peaceful life. They talk about me like I'm some kind of saintly martyr sacrificing my happiness for my husband. But the truth is, there isn't a saintly bone in my body. I have my own deeply personal, incredibly profound, and painful reason for doing exactly this. The truth is, when I was 11 years old, my parents went through a bitter, chaotic divorce. My father left for another woman, and they got married shortly after. That was how a stepmother entered my life, a woman I still look back on with absolute dread, even as an adult. She was a textbook definition of the evil stepmother from the darkest fairy tales. She did everything in her power to make me feel isolated, alien, and completely unwanted in my own father's house. She constantly, methodically turned them against me, openly mocked my flaws in front of guests, locked my things away, and berated me for costing them extra money for food and clothing. She made my existence there an absolute nightmare. Eventually, she got exactly what she wanted. I practically stopped visiting my dad. We drifted completely apart, and I grew up carrying a massive, bleeding psychological wound that took me years of therapy to heal. And back then, as a terrified, crying teenager sobbing into my pillow, I made myself the most unbreakable vow of my life. If I ever found myself in a situation where I had to be a stepmother to someone else's child, I would sooner burn in hell, I would sooner sink into the earth, before I ever hurt that child with a single word or a single look. I would never, ever make them feel unwanted or like a second-class citizen. My stepmother tried to break me, forcing her ridiculous rules on me and making me beg for her approval. I will never do that to this girl. I have no intention of replacing her late mother, and I'm not going to force her to call me Mom. I don't need that. I just want to be her best friend, her fierce protector, and the person she can come to at any hour of the day or night, knowing she will be understood, held tight, and shielded from every storm. So, while my husband certainly thinks he's the luckiest guy alive to have such an understanding wife, the reality is that I am the one who feels our family has been incredibly, phenomenally blessed. A beautiful, pure, vulnerable, and loving human being has suddenly walked into our lives, our oldest daughter, and I am waiting with immense, genuine excitement for the day her suitcases are sitting in our hallway, her uncle drives away, and our joyful family chaos gets just a little bit bigger, warmer, and happier. This next story happened quite recently, and I ended up getting involved in it in the most unexpected way possible. For the past few months, I've been going to a high-intensity Pilates class at a local fitness studio 3 times a week. Our group is pretty tight-knit. We all know each other and usually chat before the workout starts. But about 3 months ago, a new woman joined our class. When she walked in on her very first day, she immediately caught everyone's attention, but honestly, in the saddest way possible. It was a beautiful, warm spring afternoon outside, and the studio itself was actually quite warm. But this woman showed up wrapped in so many layers of clothing you'd think she would go for a hike in the Arctic. She was wearing massive, baggy sweatpants, a long t-shirt that hung down to her knees, and a heavy, thick hoodie with the hood pulled up and drawn so tight you could barely see her face. She was incredibly timid and anxious. Her shoulders were completely hunched over. Her head was down, and her eyes were glued to the floor the entire time. She immediately chose the farthest, darkest corner of the room, right away from the mirrors, trying to hide behind everyone else so nobody would notice her. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with working out in modest clothing. Everyone has their own insecurities or personal preferences, but Pilates with our instructor is a very demanding high-intensity workout. You start dripping with sweat within the first 15 minutes. Moving and stretching in a thick winter hoodie in a warm room looked like absolute torture. You could see how much she was struggling with the heat, but she stubbornly refused to take off the hoodie or even unzip the collar. Since my mat happened to be right next to her corner, I decided to show some basic human kindness. During the first week, I just gave her a warm, genuine smile whenever we crossed paths. By the second week, I started saying hello and wishing her a good workout. At first, she seemed startled whenever I spoke to her. She would just mumble something, look away, and pull her hood even tighter. But consistency changes things. Slowly, week after week, we started exchanging a few words before class, and while rolling up our mats at the end. Over the course of 2 months, she finally opened up, and I learned the shocking reality of her life. Her name is Sarah. She's 36, and she has been married for over 10 years with 3 kids. The real shock came when she told me about her husband. He was the ultimate definition of what people online call a professional couch gamer. And let me be clear, this wasn't a man who temporarily lost his job and was taking care of the house while looking for a new one. This wasn't a stay-at-home dad cooking, cleaning, and helping the kids with homework while his wife provided for the family. No, he hadn't worked a single day in 4 years. His daily routine consisted of waking up in the afternoon, walking to the kitchen to grab food, sitting at his expensive gaming setup, putting his headphones on, and playing video games until 5 in the morning, screaming at his teammates. Every single financial responsibility, the mortgage, utility bills, insurance, groceries, and clothes for 3 growing kids, fell entirely on Sarah. She worked long hours at her job, rushing home tired only to start a second shift, cooking dinner, cleaning the house, doing laundry, and helping the kids with their schoolwork. Her 38-year-old husband wouldn't even bother to take his dirty dishes from his desk to the sink. He just piled them up on the floor next to his computer. But what was truly disgusting wasn't just his laziness. It was the fact that he was actively and systematically destroying her self-esteem. Sarah told me that after having 3 kids, her body naturally changed a bit. She didn't become overweight. She just got a slight belly and softer hips, completely normal for a mother of 3. But this guy, who was completely out of shape himself from sitting all day drinking soda and eating chips, regularly made cruel, mocking comments about her appearance. Whenever Sarah put on a nice dress or a pair of jeans, he would turn away from his monitor, look her up and down with a disgusted expression, and smirk, saying, "Wow, those clothes are looking pretty tight on you, honey. Maybe you should find a gym or something, because looking at those love handles is getting pretty depressing." And he was saying this while living off the money she earned. Sarah took his words to heart. She genuinely believed that if her own husband found her unattractive, she must look monstrous. That was why she forced herself to join the Pilates class, and that was why she hid under those suffocating layers of clothing. She was deeply ashamed for anyone to see the body her husband had labeled defective. I was absolutely furious hearing this, but I knew that if I immediately started yelling at her to leave him, she would panic, close up, and stop talking to me. So I chose a gentler approach. I decided to drown her in genuine, positive reinforcement. During workouts, whenever she did a movement well, I would loudly say, "Wow, Sarah, your flexibility is amazing. I wish I could do that stretch." In the locker room, I would casually mention, "Sarah, you have such great shoulders and collarbones. An open top would look beautiful on you." I constantly praise her progress and her natural beauty, wanting her to see herself through the eyes of a normal, supportive person. The magic worked. After about a month, Sarah showed up to class without her heavy hoodie, wearing just a regular workout t-shirt. A couple of weeks later, she traded her baggy sweatpants for athletic leggings that actually fit her great. Her posture completely changed. Her shoulders pushed back, her head lifted high, and she started smiling and greeting the other women in the room. It was incredible to watch a confident, beautiful woman slowly emerge from that fearful shell. She started wearing light makeup, fixing her hair, and a bright spark returned to her eyes. The climax of the story happened last week. Class had just finished, and everyone was packing up their bags. Sarah walked over to me with a calm, incredibly determined smile. She looked at me and said, "I did something completely crazy this weekend." I smiled back and asked, "Oh yeah? What did you do? Did you finally buy that dress we talked about?" She shook her head, took a deep breath, and said in a firm, steady voice, "I finally filed for divorce." While he was asleep, I packed up all his clothes, his gaming computer, his monitors, drove everything over to his mom's apartment, left it in her hallway, and told him we are done. I am not supporting a parasite anymore. My jaw dropped. Sarah looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes, and said, "I want to thank you. Your kindness and your words over these past months helped me remember who I actually am. You helped me see my own value, and you gave me the courage to stand up for myself and my kids." We shared a huge hug right there in the studio. But when I went home that evening, a sudden wave of guilt hit me. I thought, oh my God, did my comments just push her into destroying her marriage? Did I just cause a family with 3 kids to split up? It took me a few days of thinking to realize the truth. I didn't ruin that marriage. Her husband ruined it years ago with his selfishness, laziness, and the cruel words he used to break her down. I didn't plot anything or force her to leave. I just helped her see her own worth that he was trying so hard to erase. If a marriage has to end for a human being to save their sanity and dignity, then that marriage was already dead. Today, Sarah is happier than ever, full of energy, and her kids finally get to see a mother who smiles instead of a broken, exhausted woman. No headers, no fluff. Let's roll straight into the third story. This next story is a bit different, but it's easily one of the most satisfying examples of instant karma I've ever witnessed firsthand. It revolves around my younger brother, Alex, who is 24, and a massive birthday event we organized for him a couple of months ago. Alex had been working incredibly hard at his job, saving up for months, and he decided he wanted to celebrate his birthday by renting out a massive, multi-level Lacertag arena for him and 12 of his closest friends. Since it was his big day, Alex paid for the entire venue out of his own pocket. It wasn't cheap, but he wanted a private session where everyone could just run around, laugh, and blow off some steam. Everything was going perfectly. We arrived at the arena. The staff gave us our briefings, and we suited up in our neon vests and laser rifles. The atmosphere was pure excitement. But just as the instructors were about to open the heavy doors to the arena for our first private match, the front door of the building slammed open, and walked this guy. He looked to be in his late 20s, wearing expensive tactical gear, holding his own custom laser rifle, and radiating an immense amount of unearned arrogance. He completely ignored the front desk, walked straight up to our group, looked at my brother, and said in a loud, condescending voice, "Hey, I'm jumping into this session with you guys. The public arena is too crowded today, and you look like you need a real challenge anyway." Alex was taken aback, but remained completely polite. He stepped forward and said, "Sorry, man, but we actually rented out this entire arena for a private birthday party. It's just for our group today." The guy scoffed, rolled his eyes, and literally shoved past my brother. "Look, kid, I don't care about your little birthday party. I pay a premium membership here, which means I play wherever I want. Don't worry, I'll go easy on your little friends." The arena manager tried to step in, looking terrified of losing a high-paying member, and awkwardly muttered to Alex, "Hey, man, it's just one guy. Maybe it's fine?" Alex looked at his friends, saw that nobody wanted a confrontation to ruin the mood, sighed, and just nodded. "Fine, but we play fair." The guy smirked, tapped his custom rifle, and whispered, "Trust me, you guys won't even see me coming." The match started, and within the first 3 minutes, this dude proved to be the most toxic, insufferable player alive. He wasn't just good, he was playing dirty. He was aggressively sprinting through corners, physically bumping into people, and spawn camping the girls in our group. Every time he tagged someone, he would loudly shout things like, "Too easy, sit down, loser," or "Go back to the lobby, garbage." He completely ruined the fun, light-hearted vibe of the party. After the first round ended, he walked out to the lobby, checked the leaderboard where his name was at the absolute top, and literally laughed in my brother's face. "Is this the best you guys can do? This is embarrassing. My grandma plays harder than this." That was the exact moment the switch flipped in Alex's head. My brother is usually a very calm, gentle guy, but he used to be a competitive athlete. He looked at the guy, gave a cold smile, and said, "All right, round 2. Let's do a team deathmatch. You against all 13 of us, since you're such a pro." The guy laughed out loud, completely blinded by his own ego. Are you serious? You guys are going to get absolutely demolished. Let's do it. The heavy doors opened for round 2, and the map became a hunting ground. The guy thought he was going to hunt us, but Alex immediately took command of our group like a military captain. He split us into 3 tactical squads, using the multi-level layout of the arena to our absolute advantage. The moment the match began, the guy sprinted into the center area, completely exposed. Alex's squad immediately pinned him down with suppressing fire from the upper balcony, completely blocking his escape. Before the guy could even process what was happening, our second squad flanked him from the left, and the third squad cut off his retreat from the right. We completely surrounded him in a tight, inescapable triangle. For the next 10 minutes, it was absolute glorious slaughter. Every single time his vest reset and lit up, signaling he was back in the game, 3 different laser beams would instantly hit his sensors from different angles. Click, click, click. He couldn't move 2 inches without his vest shutting down. He tried to run. He tried to hide behind a barrier, but someone was always there to tag him. He started getting visibly frustrated, sweating through his expensive gear and screaming, "Hey, this is cheating. You can't just group up on me like this." Alex just called out from the shadows, "Hey, you said you wanted a challenge, right? Don't cry now." When the final buzzer sounded, we all walked out to the lobby. The big digital screen refreshed with the final scores, and the guy's name was at the very bottom, with a spectacular record of 0 tags and over 100 deaths. His face went from bright red to completely pale. He didn't say a single word. He violently ripped off his glowing vest, threw it onto the counter, packed his custom rifle into his case, and practically ran out the front door of the building, slamming it behind him. The entire lobby erupted into cheers and laughter. It was the absolute highlight of the night, and honestly, the best birthday gift my brother could have asked for. It just goes to show, never let your ego write checks your skills can't cash, especially when you're crashing someone else's party. This next story comes from my close friend Mark, who works as a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. Mark is the kind of guy who just wants to do his job, get paid, and go home to his family. But a few months ago, his company hired a new project manager named Karen, and she turned the entire office dynamic into an absolute circus within her first week. Karen was the definition of corporate entitlement. She didn't actually know how to code, but she loved throwing her weight around, micromanaging everyone, and taking credit for the engineering team's hard work. But the real issue started with the office parking lot. Our company has a small, private garage, and the spots are assigned based on seniority. Mark, having been there for 8 years, possessed one of the best spots right next to the elevator doors. It was a massive blessing, especially during the freezing winter months. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Mark pulled into the garage only to find a brand new, expensive SUV parked squarely in his assigned spot. Sitting right on the dashboard was a bright pink pass with Karen written on it. Mark sighed, parked in the muddy public lot down the street, and walked into the office soaked. He went straight to Karen's desk and politely said, "Hey, Karen, I think you accidentally parked in my spot, number 14. Karen didn't even look up from her laptop. She just waved her hand dismissively and said, "It's not an accident, Mark. As a manager, my time is far more valuable than yours. Walking from the public lot wastes my energy, which lowers my productivity. You're just an engineer. You can use the exercise. The spot is mine now." Mark was stunned. He went straight to HR, but the HR manager was completely useless and just mumbled something about picking your battles and maintaining a peaceful work environment. Basically, they didn't want to deal with Karen's dramatic outbursts. When Mark told the rest of the engineering team during lunch, a cold, calculated plot began to form. You see, engineers are quiet, but if you mess with their routine, they will dismantle your life with mathematical precision. The next morning, Karen's SUV was in Mark's spot again. But what Karen didn't realize was that our company shared a garage with a heavy-duty commercial plumbing and construction supply warehouse next door. Mark's spot was directly adjacent to their loading bay zone. Mark happened to be good friends with Bob, the warehouse manager, who operated a massive industrial forklift. Mark walked down to the loading bay, handed Bob a hot coffee and a box of donuts, and explained the situation. Bob looked at the illegally parked SUV, smiled a wide, mischievous grin, and said, "Say no more, brother. We got a massive shipment of cast iron pipes arriving in 10 minutes anyway." 10 minutes later, Bob utilized his forklift to move 3 massive, heavy-duty industrial pallets loaded with tons of concrete blocks and iron pipes. He placed them with millimeter precision, exactly 2 inches away from Karen's front bumper, rear bumper, and both side doors. Her car was completely, flawlessly boxed into a fortress of solid industrial material. There was physically no way to open a single door or move the vehicle even an inch. Around 5 p.m., the office clock ticked down, and everyone started heading to the garage. Mark and the entire engineering team casually stood by the elevators, pretending to chat, just waiting for the show. Karen walked out, clicked her key fob, and froze. Her face turned an incredible shade of bright crimson. She began screaming at the top of her lungs, stomping her feet, and stormed into the warehouse bay, demanding they move the pallets immediately. Bob calmly stepped out, wiping grease off his hands, looked at his clipboard, and said, "Sorry, lady. Corporate safety regulations. This is a designated holding zone for a major construction project. These pallets are legally logged in. The union crew that operates the forklift clocked out at 4:30 p.m. Nobody touches this machinery until Monday morning at 8 a.m. Karen looked like she was about to explode. She screamed, "Do you know who I am? I will have you fired. Move this garbage right now." Bob just shrugged, locked the warehouse doors, and walked away. She had to spend the entire weekend taking expensive Ubers back and forth, and her precious SUV sat trapped in the dark garage for 3 days. On Monday morning, the pallets were finally moved, and Karen never parked in Mark's spot again. In fact, she barely spoke to the engineering team for the rest of her time at the company, realizing that while she had the management title, the engineers held all the real power. This 5th and final story happened to my cousin, Ethan, who is 27 and works as a mid-level financial analyst. Ethan is incredibly smart, quiet guy who has always preferred to let his results do the talking. Last year, he was working at a corporate firm where his immediate supervisor was a guy named Chad. Chad was the ultimate corporate parasite. He spent his entire day walking around with a coffee mug, talking loudly about synergy, and systematically stealing the ideas of everyone beneath him to look good in front of the upper management. The biggest project of the year was a massive multi-million-dollar portfolio restructuring for the company's most important client. The entire department's bonuses and future promotions depended on this single presentation. Ethan practically lived at his office desk for 3 straight weeks, working 14-hour days, analyzing data, and building a flawless, incredibly complex financial model from scratch. He put his heart and soul into this project, barely sleeping. The night before the big presentation, Ethan finalized a master slide deck, saved it to the company's shared network drive, and sent a polite email to Chad letting him know it was ready for review. Chad didn't reply. The next morning, Ethan walked into the grand boardroom, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. The CEO, the board members, and the high-profile clients were all seated around a massive mahogany table. Chad stood at the front of the room, looking incredibly sharp in an expensive suit. But when the presentation started, Ethan's jaw dropped. Chad had completely removed Ethan's name from the title slides, replacing it only with his own. For the next 40 minutes, Chad stood there presenting Ethan's exact slides, using words like "my personal analysis" and "the model I designed over the past month." He didn't give Ethan a single shred of credit. Ethan sat in the corner, his stomach churning with absolute rage. He looked around the room and saw the CEO nodding in pure admiration. Chad was about to get a massive promotion and a 6-figure bonus using Ethan's sweat and tears. But instead of throwing a tantrum or causing a scene, Ethan took a deep breath, opened his laptop, and tapped into his quiet engineering mindset. He remembered a very specific safety measure he had built into the financial model. The presentation ended, and the room erupted into applause. The CEO stood up, looked at Chad, and said, "Chad, this is absolutely phenomenal work. The logic is bulletproof. However, before we sign the final contract, the board needs to see how this model reacts to a sudden 5% inflation spike. Can you show us that live simulation right now on the big screen?" Chad's smile instantly froze. His face went completely pale. He didn't know how the model worked. He didn't even know what formulas were in the cells. He began sweating through his shirt, stuttering, yes, sir, absolutely. Let me just, adjust the macro parameters. He nervously clicked around the Excel sheet, changing a random number, but the entire screen suddenly popped up a massive, blinking red error message. Critical system logout. Access denied. Chad panicked, hitting keys randomly. I don't understand. It was just working. That was Ethan's cue. He calmly stood up from his seat, walked to the front of the room, and looked at the CEO. Excuse me, sir. Chad forgot to mention that I built the actual architecture for this entire system to prevent unauthorized tampering or intellectual property theft. The master formulas are secured with an encrypted macro tied to my specific employee ID. If anyone else tries to alter the core metrics without my decryption key, the system automatically locks down to protect the client's data. The entire room went dead silent. The CEO looked from Ethan to Chad, whose face was now a deep shade of crimson. Ethan casually reached over, typed his personal authorization code, adjusted the inflation metric to 5%, and the entire model instantly refreshed, displaying the perfect, beautiful simulation on the screen. The client was incredibly impressed, but the CEO was furious about Chad's deception. The very next day, Chad was stripped of his title and quietly fired for corporate fraud. Ethan, on the other hand, was given Chad's old office, a massive salary bump, and full creative control over the department's largest portfolios. It was the ultimate professional payback, proving that while a parasite can steal the presentation, they can never steal the intelligence required to run it.